The following is a presentation of the Broadband Universe, brought to you in part by Vitruvi, the end-to-end GIS-based construction management platform that connects asset owners, operators, general contractors, and subcontractors for unmatched project control and collaboration. Manage every aspect of your telecommunications or utility infrastructure construction program with Vitruvi. Build faster, reduce costs, improve quality. Book your demo today on vitruvisoftware.com to see how we can help you build at scale. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Broadband Universe podcast. I'm Craig Corbin, and it is such a pleasure to welcome my guest today, Francella Ochillo, the Zuckerman Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership, and more importantly, the Executive Director of Next Century Cities. Francella, it is so good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And every single time we get to have conversations, I love the fact that you always start with such high energy. It actually makes me feel like it's contagious. So I'm like, let's do this.
We want everybody excited because it's an exciting time in our industry, goodness knows, and it has been way too long since our last visit. And as we were chatting before we began the session today, much has changed in the broadband landscape since we last visited, and so much to cover in our visit today. But before we get into the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the conversation, for those that are not familiar with your work at Next Century Cities, give us that 30,000-foot overview.
Will do. So I've been at Next Century Cities since July of 2019, and it was a very, very different landscape back then. Yeah. When I first started at Next Century Cities, our goal was really just to make sure that we were supporting local officials in whatever their broadband plans were. Sometimes those plans were focused on broadband access, sometimes they're focused on adoption, and sometimes, quite frankly, I think they're brainstorming, like what's next, what's possible, who do we need to do it with, how do we actually get community engagement. So we are a little bit of a one-stop shop for them to not only be a partner, but also to be able to elevate their voices into federal, state, local, even county level proceedings to ensure that we actually have community level perspectives documented on the record. Most recently, especially in light of not only the historic amount of funding that has been filtered through since COVID, and also I think really people just making new plans for why we need to invest in broadband. Why is this critical infrastructure in neighborhoods? I think of our role is to really be able to give people clarity and visibility about, is your plan a long-term plan? And also really thinking about, are there ways that we can actually find efficiencies over how other people are doing the same thing. So now that broadband is a thing for every single community, and I mean, honestly, I remember my first week that I got my job, I specifically remember talking to somebody back home in Louisiana, and I said I worked on broadband, and they were like, I don't know what broadband is, but my internet is terrible. And I specifically remember that because broadband was a term people used in DC. When you go to most cities, people were not talking about that. So that's why I really just want to make sure people understand, even 5 years ago, this was a completely different landscape. It had a completely different roster of players and also a different type of interest. And now it's something that you could actually talk about in any household.
100%. And it's no longer considered a luxury in any way, shape, or form, a necessity across the board. And something you touched on, I think, is key in that we're entering that gold rush of funding over the next 5-10 years, billions and billions of dollars that will be distributed. The key being to make sure that it is used wisely and that people that need it the most receive the additional networking. And one of the other things, too, that's important, many times when we talk about the digital divide, and we're automatically drawn to rural parts of the country that have long been without, either unserved or underserved, but cities across the country will have deserts of connectivity. And that's something that I hope we get right in the next 5 to 10 years.
When we're talking about even using the terminology, even digital deserts, it doesn't matter if you're in a digital desert, if you are in Southeast Queens in New York, or if you are in Dubuque, Iowa. It doesn't matter. Like either way, you are still disconnected from the things that you need. You're not able to actually get online to apply for certain services, maybe to get certain benefits. You face very similar obstacles regardless of your geography. One thing that I do want to emphasize, though, is when we are talking about billions of dollars of funding filtering through every single state and also territory, is we have to be mindful of the communities, the local leaders, the people who are new to office that don't necessarily know where to get in line. I think those types of programs are beautiful when you know what to do, how to prepare, who's your partner, I'm ready. That's great. Sure. But for people who are just getting started on the journey, and there are many, this is still something that's overwhelming. It's hard. It's something that's takes a lot of manpower that sometimes communities just simply don't have in their budgets. And I'm also mindful of especially small communities where, as you mentioned, in rural communities, a lot of the times where people have dual roles. You might be a part-time city administrator. You might be the city manager, but maybe you're also the dentist. Like there are people who are doing more than one thing. So broadband isn't their only priority, but it's still something that needs to grab their attention.
You touched on two things that I think are key there. And one, the fact that there is a tremendous need for partnerships, but the challenge of making sure that those on the ground are educated, to have the information with which to work to make the right decisions to go forward with the opportunities that will present themselves. From the standpoint of your perspective, how do we tackle that hurdle, which quite honestly may be one of the most important in this conversation?
Partnerships are thorny and they're complicated, especially when you are looking for a partnership, but you don't necessarily feel like an expert on the issue because you are essentially relying on the other person to fill in the gaps in which you don't know. So I think that the best partnerships are the ones where both people come to the table being explicit about what they need and what they are able to do in an authentic way. Mm-hmm. Too often, communities are in a position where they don't know all the right questions to ask. So they are essentially relying on whatever information maybe a consultant or a sales rep has told them, and they aren't always able to adjust that agreement or to go back and revisit a term, and they're stuck with it. And being stuck with it might cost like millions of dollars. So we have to really think carefully about partnerships. Are the best ones are the ones that are equal partnerships, the ones where both people gain something. It's not necessarily a lopsided agreement where someone else feels shorted. And also another part that's important about the partnership is really thinking about the fact that there are several people that need to be involved on both sides of the equation to keep those agreements alive, because it's really hard when you have I'll take, for example, I'm in the city of Boston right now. One of the people who just retired from their post has been handling their broadband for over 25 years. There are a lot of things that one person knows, right? And if there's any change, that means that whoever fills that person's shoes is not going to get the same terms. They're not going to get the same, benefits. So we have to really think about what happens for our transition plan to be able to bring other people in so that we can make sure that we live up to those agreements, and that we also make sure that we at the end are accountable for the things that we said we were going to do in those agreements.
No doubt. And one of the components of the conversation that is, I think, front and center has been, certainly of late, is the role that data mapping will play in the distribution of funding. There has been much said. I have been a critic of the FCC mapping due to its woeful inadequacy. I am encouraged, hopefully, that we are beginning to make strides in getting that right, but knowing that that type of information will be used to make the decisions for distribution of funding is something that a lot of people are concerned about. Your thoughts on that topic?
I think it doesn't matter where I am. Everyone always, it's like you put on your white gloves when you're ready to talk about data. You have to use like positive language. You're like, this is painful, but I'm encouraged. Think about the language we all have to use around this. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and +1. I agree with you. This is painful and unpleasant. I have been a very vocal critic about not only the fact that we need to correct some of our data mapping protocols, but also to farm new ways to do this. I think that the truth is, if we are acknowledging that this is something that is dynamic and that changes and that we're never going to find the perfect data set, then maybe we can't only rely on one data set. And I bring that up because I don't think people realize, even though there's a new wave of states and counties and municipalities that are collecting their own data, very often, especially state data sets, use the FCC's data set as the baseline. So we start with imperfect data and just add to it. So it's not just a problem at the federal level. Very often it actually infects state level data. So I do want to be explicit in that, yes, there's very specific things that the FC can and should do to improve its data mapping protocols. But I also think that we should be thinking about, why are we only relying on the FCC? Because if the FCC has chosen not to update it, then maybe this means this is a time where we need to rethink, why aren't we empowering and supporting states that want to collect data sets, that know what kind of questions to ask, and actually have something at stake for imperfect data?
Absolutely. And to that point, you're beginning to see states take the bull by the horn, so to speak. Here in Georgia, complete mapping that showed a delta of 72% between what reality was and what the FCC maps showed. The more of that we see, I think, the better in moving forward. You're watching the Broadband Universe podcast, brought to you by Lit Communities. Light up your community. You deserve better internet. By Vetro Fiber Map, radically simpler fiber management. And by Vitruvi, build faster, reduce costs, and improve quality. My guest today, Francella Ochillo, the executive director of Next Century Cities. And Francella, there's so much we can talk about on the data mapping. We could do an entire episode on that. So we'll set that to the side. And again, being the eternal optimists that we are, we will hope for the best in moving forward with that.
I'm thinking good thoughts.
Absolutely. But when we talk about this entire conversation, your organization, have been so involved in many aspects of the conversation, and digital literacy is right near the top of the importance. It's wonderful to finally get connectivity, but to be able to utilize that bandwidth when you finally get it is also so important. Talk about where we stand now in making progress in that part of the picture.
Well, if we're talking about digital literacy, I think just to put it into frame for me, when we talk about broadband access, those plans are going to be deficient if we also haven't thought about how are we going to get those high-speed connections across a household's front door. And that's where the digital literacy, having computing devices, the training support, all of those things come in. For me, when I show up in a lot of communities, I actually usually go and speak to local officials in their element, because that's where we get the best information. We were in Philly earlier at the beginning of January, Albuquerque a few weeks before that. Like, we go to a lot of different places. And when we go and talk to these people, some of the things that come up all the time is that if their residents don't actually get to have experienced technology. They maybe don't have a computing device at home. Maybe they know, yes, I know how I need to sign up for service. Yes, I need to open a bank account online. Yes, I need to sign up to get my tax forms. But I don't actually either have a reliable device or reliable connection. I don't know about the programs that you're telling me I'm eligible for. So even if you're saying, yes, there's a low-income broadband subsidy that could help you, but that person doesn't really have the information to go online to basically sign up. When we think about all of those deficiencies, it really takes away from really good intentions with the broadband access piece when we haven't taken that holistic approach to make sure that they can use it. So also some of my research, especially over the past year and a half, I was focusing on what's the economic impact of that. And I think that we're not always talking about the fact that it isn't just that they are denied access to certain services, it's also that it costs all of us a little something. Because when you have high concentrations of people that are unable to get online, forget the reason why. It doesn't matter if it's because of access or because they don't know how or they don't have a computing device. if you have high concentrations of people who cannot get online, we all pay a little something when we are adjacent to them. Sure. You might pay more in social service costs. You might pay a cost because you have reduced academic rigor, because maybe they know at the school we have, 60% of their students aren't able to get online when they get home. So they change what types of assignments and the type of thresholds that they have to meet. There are all sorts of indirect costs that we pay when people are unable to get online. So when we're talking about digital literacy, I do want to make sure it's not just framed at it being a benefit to the person who's able to get online. It's something that actually benefits all of us.
Because what you just described becomes a domino effect with respect to having a direct impact on the ability to be a part of a competitive workforce in many different ways. From a community's standpoint, remaining economically viable for the future. I mean, it is so much of a domino effect down the line. How do we make a difference with regard to bringing to the forefront the importance of that component of this conversation on the local level?
I think it's really important that that's a place where we have to know our own numbers. I think, we talk a lot about how broadband data actually supports deployment, but broadband data actually also helps you retool and really think about, where do you want to aim your strategies? Is it that maybe in a certain part of the Mississippi Delta, it's really an issue that manifests itself in education or in wages? So maybe they need to focus on training and making sure not only that you have K through 12 education, but that you have adult learning. Or is it a thing that you're thinking about, I'm in places where we have low health outcomes, where we're seeing there are huge health disparities, and is it something that we need to attack that way? I think these types of interventions look different depending on what geography you're in. Sure. And I think it's okay for us to acknowledge that not every area, not every region is going to need the same thing. And so it allows us to actually also have people start wherever they are, because we need lots of people working on this. So it's not just that we need broadband experts or just that we need local officials working with state leaders. We need people working on this because it's a tangential issue for a lot of different topics. So the thing is, give everybody a piece of something that they can plug in and say, yes, this is something that I can do in my neighborhood. So I think that's one thing for me when we talk about data with deployment. I think we miss an opportunity when we don't really talk about not only the tax and the drain that it has on communities when people are disconnected, but we don't always also quantify the possibilities. Because if we can quantify the possibilities, that might also allow certain regions to be able to attract new investments, to say, we have a workforce that is uniquely fitted for this investment. And so I think we should be thinking about how to use those numbers to our advantage.
And in essence, each community is ground zero, if you will, in that process. And so sage advice, no doubt. One of the things that I wanted to touch on before we drew near to the end of the visit, you made mention of being in Boston, and we noted at the top that you are currently a Zuckerman Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Center for Public Leadership. Congratulations on that. How is it going? Tell us about what you have going on there.
Thank you so much. This past 2 years has been such a wild ride. I think, I started this journey as a Balfour Center Technology and Public Purpose Fellow, and basically just focused on my research on what are the economic and generational impacts of digital inequities nationwide. That research focused on looking at the 10 highest and the 10 lowest income states to find out what did people have in common when we were looking at disconnected populations. And it was surprisingly similar, that it didn't matter if you were in a high income state or a low income state. The obstacles that disconnected populations faced were almost exactly the same. What changed things was the tax revenues for the state, if they had more money to actually support those populations. Now I get to just focus on my master's program. I'll be graduating in May, and I'm really just so excited. It's been such a crazy, wild ride to get here. I think being able to balance work and school, it's really something that you have to, I'm awake a lot. People see me in the airport all the time because I still get to a lot of cities. I will be in California next week. I will be in Dallas at the Federal Reserve on the 2nd. So I get to a lot of cities, even in spite of my school schedule. So I'm usually running back to make sure I get back in time for class. But I'm just really grateful because, quite frankly, it's like, my story is only possible in the United States of America.
Absolutely.
So,
and
yeah.
What a story it is, and we are so proud of you and the work that you're doing. I have to leave you. I would be remiss if I didn't ask the traditional crystal ball question. Your vision for the future, the work that you're doing, and the impact that it will hopefully make as we move forward.
The thing that I think is the most important here when we're thinking about looking at this maybe 10 or 15 years from now is thinking about, number one, are we willing to make sure that people across the country have access to higher benchmarks of technology, so we can't keep saying good enough with low benchmarks? And then secondly, the way that we think about adoption strategies. It's not enough for us to rely on community programs. It's not enough to just hope you have a good community partner, whether it's a school or a library, to carry the mantle on supporting marginally connected populations. We need to make sure that that's actually a part of the planning, the budgets, it actually gets federal, state, and local resources to invest in that. It's not something that can be separate and apart.
We are so proud to have you on the Broadband Universe. It is great to have visited with you, and wish you congratulations on the coming graduation in just a few months and the work that you have ahead. And we look forward to circling back with you down the line. On behalf of Francella, I'm Craig. Thanks for letting us be a part of your day. We'll see you next time right here on the Broadband Universe. So long, everyone.